Hello you guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, I like to do a lot of sewing patterns, sewing tutorials. I just do a lot of sewing, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make this little mini 6-inch mouse. And actually it's more like 5 inches, but I made it to go inside of this dollhouse. You can find that pattern on my Etsy shop as well as this pattern. If you buy the dollhouse pattern, it comes with the mouse pattern included, but you can also buy the mouse pattern separate if you don't want to make the dollhouse. If you're a visual learner like me and you like to watch video walkthroughs, this is why I'm filming this video, is because it always helps me when there's a video walkthrough of something so I can see exactly how it's done. So if you're interested in making this mouse, you can head over to my Etsy shop, which is linked below, and you can purchase the sewing pattern. It will also come with a PDF photo tutorial, so picture by picture, step by step PDF tutorial, as well as a sewing pattern, but I'm filming this video just so you have an extra asset in making this mouse so it's fail proof. If you guys have any questions and if you love this mouse pattern, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment if you have any questions, or you can head over to my Instagram at Sarah's Day Off and also leave me questions there. Let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to do is take your piece of fabric and fold it so that you can fit all of your pattern pieces on where it's folded on the double layer of fabric. And then you're going to place each piece on the piece of fabric and you're going to trace them. And if your fabric has a right side and a wrong side, just make sure that the right sides are facing inward and that you're tracing on the wrong side, because you want to be able to turn everything right sides out. So you're just going to trace. I like to use a heat erasable pen because it's nice when you don't have to wash it after you sew it if you've already washed your fabric. But you can use a water-soluble marker or a piece of tailor's chalk, anything like that. And then when you are tracing, just make sure that you're transferring any opening notches that are included on the pattern piece. So you'll see that there are opening notches on the arms, so just make sure you transfer both of those, and then you're going to pin everything together. I like to use a lot of pins so that the fabric isn't sliding when I'm sewing. Go ahead and cut off any excess fabric that you have and bring it over to your sewing machine. And then for pieces that have opening notches, so on the arms, make sure that you start at one notch, sew all the way around to the other notch, and just make sure you're back stitching on both the beginning and the end. And just make sure you're not sewing over those notches because we need to leave those open for turning right side out. And then you'll see also on your pattern pieces, like the legs and the body and the ears, there's not any notches for the openings because the entire side or wherever that line is needs to be remained open. So on the legs, it's at the top. You want to not stitch on the top of the legs. On the body, it's at the bottom. That bottom line, you don't want to stitch on that. And then at the ears, it's also on the bottom, so don't stitch on that. Once you finish sewing, you're going to get your fabric shears and cut around each piece. If there are any curves, just make sure that you're snipping in towards the fabric without cutting the seam itself, because that obviously is not what we want to do. We just want to make it so that you can turn it right sides out very easily. And you can do this with each piece that you have. And also a tip for when you're sewing is to shorten your stitch length on any curves. That just makes it easier to sew, in my opinion. But then you're going to turn everything right sides out. You probably will need to use a tube turner for the smaller pieces, not so much the body, but on the smaller pieces I like to use a tube turner, and that just makes it a lot easier to turn everything right side out because the pieces again are so small. Just make sure that you're pushing all the corners out so that they're nice and flush and that there's no fabric that's bunched up on the sides. And then you are going to start stuffing. So grab your polyfill or whatever you want to use and just start stuffing each piece except for the ears. The ears don't need to be stuffed, just the body and the legs and the arms. And I like to stuff them pretty full, not like rock solid, but pretty full. And for the smaller pieces, like the legs, to really get the stuffing all the way down to the feet, I like to use these crafts tweezers. You can use anything that you have that can get it down into the small spaces, but the craft tweezers really help me. And for the body specifically, make sure that you fold the bottom seam allowance in towards the center, because then you're going to add your legs. And this is really simple. You just put the legs underneath the body and pin them in place. I like to use my sewing machine for this. If you aren't able to get your mouse under the sewing machine, you can definitely hand stitch it, but I'm usually able to get it under my sewing machine. And just sew a straight line across. You can go over a couple times just for the strength of the mouse, but then it's time to close the arms. And I always use a ladder stitch for this. If you've never used a ladder stitch before, here's a video walkthrough, step-by-step tutorial of how to do a ladder stitch, and it's very simple. But you're going to do the same thing for the opening on the ears. Even though it's not stuffed, you still need to close that opening, and then you're going to fold the ear in half and then stitch a ladder stitch across to keep it closed, and then you're going to place it on the head, and you are going to also use a ladder stitch to attach the ear to the head as well. When you are attaching the arms, I like to pin them in place first, and then this stitch is a bit different. It's not a ladder stitch. You're just going to go from side to side. So you're going to start on one arm, stick your needle all the way through the body to the other side, and you're basically just going to go back and forth a few times until you feel confident that the arms aren't going to go anywhere. And then you're going to tie off a knot at the end when you finish that, and then your arms are going to be attached. Make sure that you cut that thread off at the end, and then all that's left is some embroidery. So I like to use a heat erasable pen to make markings for where I want the eyes and the nose and the mouth to be. And I used embroidery thread for the actual face. You could probably get away with just using regular sewing thread, but I used the embroidery floss for this, and I only used 2 strands. So I split it to where I only had a couple strands. And then I went in behind the ear just so that my thread will be hidden after I tied that knot off at the end. And then I came out through the first eye that I was working on, and I just basically did a back stitch across. I worked on one eye at a time and did a back stitch across the entire eye, and just go back and forth until you're happy with the way that the eye looks. And once you're happy with how that first eye looks, you're going to stick your needle back through that same eye and out the other eye marking that you made on the other side of the face. And then you'll do the same thing on this eye. So you're going to do a back stitch until you're happy with how it looks. Once you finish your second eye, if your floss is still long enough, stick your needle back through the eye and go to the nose. So you have kind of got to finagle your way into the nose, but it is definitely doable. This just makes it so you don't have to tie off a knot, and you can do just one continuous stitch so that there's not a knot that you have to hide. And for this one, I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing a back stitch, and you just go back and forth all the way down the nose, wherever you want it to be. Just make sure that you make a marking of where you want it to be and just follow that template, and you'll go back and forth in a back stitch all the way down until you're happy with how the nose looks. And then you will do the mouth, and that's just a single piece of worth of a back stitch, just following again the template that you make for the mouth. And then once you finish your mouth, you're going to stick it back through the body, through the mouth, and then I like to come out the eye because then I can tie off a knot pretty easily and it won't be visible because it's the eye. So once you finish your mouth, go back through the eye and then tie off a knot. And once you've tied your knot, just tuck your needle back in through the eye, and that will hide the knot, and pull it pretty taut. And then when you're pulling it at the same time, cut that thread, because then the thread will be pulled back into the body and it won't be visible on the actual mouse. And then cut any loose pieces that you see anywhere, and then your face is finished and you can move on to making the dress. For the bodice of the dress, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to make a fold in your fabric with the right sides facing, and then you're going to trace the pattern piece on the wrong side of the fabric. Again, I like to just use a water-soluble marker, but you're going to do the same thing. You're going to trace it and then pin everything together, cut any excess fabric, and then you're going to sew, leaving the entire bottom part of the dress open. So don't stitch along the bottom. Still make a line so you know where to cut at the end, but don't stitch along the bottom. Once you have everything sewn, you can go ahead and cut the bottom and the sides, again leaving about a 1/4 inch worth of seam allowance around your tracing, and then go ahead and cut off any corners and then snip any of the curves, but just make sure that you don't cut through the seam, and again snip those corners so that everything will turn out very nicely. And you can use a tube turner if you need, or just like a pencil or something to help you turn the dress bodice right side out. And I like to use this ballpoint turner that has a circle on the edge. It just makes it have a really nice corner. And then you're going to grab your skirt piece and you're going to fold a 1/4 inch of the way in twice and press that down nice and tight so that you have it encloses the raw edges on the side. So you're going to go in and then in again a 1/4 inch, and just press that side really nicely. And you're going to do the same thing on the bottom hem. So fold it up a 1/4 of an inch, and then you can press it this first time, or you can fold it twice and then press it, and then you're going to again fold it another time a 1/4 inch of the way up and press this down really nicely. And once you do that, you can unfold your bottom hem. You just want to have it pressed before you start sewing the sides. Bring it to the machine and start sewing your sides down, and then you can refold where you had the bottom hem folded and then sew along that bottom hem as well. And then you're going to sew a basting stitch because we're going to gather it just a little bit. So on the top about 1/4 of an inch, you're going to extend your stitch length to the longest it will go, and without back stitching you're going to stitch across the entire top of it in a straight line. Just make sure at the end you leave long tails so that you're able to pull and gather the fabric, but again, do not back stitch. So you can see I'm leaving some nice tails at the end, and you're just going to hold on to your bobbin thread, so your bottom thread that you used, and then you're just going to pull it in so that it gathers nicely along that thread. And again, you don't have to do too much. It doesn't take a lot at all. Just a little bit will work. And just, you can look at your bodice. You want it to just line up to the bottom of your bodice. So gather until it's the same length as the raw edge of your bodice. And then you're going to pin those right sides together. And once you have everything pinned, you're going to bring it to your machine and sew about a 1/4 inch of a seam allowance, so a 1/4 inch away from the raw edge. And then if you have a serger, you can finish the seam that way, but if you don't, just use a zigzag stitch and finish it so that the raw edges won't fray. And then once you finish this, you're going to use your ladder stitch again to close the shoulder openings. So this is truly just holding them together and closing that so that they're connected and not just hanging open. And then you can put your dress on your mouse and make sure everything looks really nice. And I like to use a snap fastener for the dresses just because they're really simple to add onto any sort of clothing or anything like that. So you're just gonna line up where you want your snap fastener to go. I have this tool that kind of looks like some pliers, and it just makes it really easy to attach the snaps to your clothing. But you're just gonna, I only used one snap. I guess you could use two if you wanted to, but one seems to be plenty for this really tiny mouse. And you're just gonna add both the male and the female side. And then once you add both, you will have a functioning dress that can be closed and worn by your small little mouse. And now you have a completed mouse. You can use it for all different things. You can put it in purses for your kids, or make a dollhouse and let it be for a dollhouse, or you could buy like a wooden dollhouse and have this be the little toys that go inside of it. So I hope you guys love this pattern. If you do, again, leave this video a thumbs up and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks!